It was a new beginning. Tens of thousands of cheering Nicaraguans, aglow with new hope, were crowded together at what is now the Plaza de la Revolucion to celebrate their liberation and independence. 3 days before, July 17, 1979, they had overthrown Somoza, one of the most corrupt and brutal regimes in Latin America, who was killing and torturing the people. He was installed 46 years earlier by the U.S. Marines when they were leaving after occupying the country for 21 years. A new war is beginning, said their leader Daniel Ortega in a speech. A war against poverty, against ignorance, against immorality. This war will be longer and more arduous than the previous war. They were striving for democracy, the right to speak without risk to their lives, for education and medical treatment. For their children were dying of diseases we've had cures of for years. Moreover, 60% of all children under the age of 4 were underfed. For 60% of rural people had been deprived of land to grow food for their families.
This is not a political part, it's a front who made the revolution. And you have in this front different parties, the Socialist Party, the Christian Democratic Party, the Liberals, the Conservative, all of them took part in this insurrection. Christians, the same time with Marxists, took part in this insurrection. The church, many priests and nuns supported the insurrection, even fought in the insurrection. Okay? Now, after 4 years, this is a country that has 60% of the GDP in the hands of the private sector.
Todo el mundo se lanzó a la calle, los niños, las mujeres, los hombres.
President Jimmy Carter watched the revolution very closely, and when he was firmly convinced that it was democratic and sound, he and the U.S. Congress blessed the Nicaraguans on their way with $75 million in aid to help rebuild their war-shattered economy. But when Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, he secretly and illegally used the CIA to raise up mercenary terrorists from Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, called the Contra Rebels, who carried out wholesale, indiscriminate killing of civilians, children, nuns, teachers, men walking to work on agricultural cooperatives, as well as 50,000 soldiers, many who were barefoot, hungry, and ragged 14-year-olds. Thousands of children had to drop out of school when the buildings were bombed or when their teachers were murdered. The money appropriated by Reagan funded the destruction of health centers, daycare centers, construction vehicles, and food stocks. Sweden doubled its aid to Nicaragua. Nonetheless, Reagan funded the destruction of bridges, dams, and communication towers. The Sandinistas expanded daycare and psychiatric services. Nonetheless, Reagan had ports mined and funded the destruction of crops and fuel storage tanks. Healthcare dramatically improved, and the World Health Organization and UNICEF declared Nicaragua under the new government to be a model country in health. Nonetheless, Reagan funded the destruction of trucks bringing milk into the city, electric power plants, radio stations, and lumber mills. The International Court of Justice ordered the United States to cease and desist immediately from all use of force against Nicaragua, ordered the USA to pay reparations for damages incurred, and ordered the USA to cease and desist immediately from all violations of the sovereignty and political independence of Nicaragua. But Reagan refused to comply. UNICEF praised the government's national campaign for the Defense of the Child program. Nonetheless, Reagan funded the placement of bombs aboard passenger planes. UNESCO awarded Nicaragua an honorable mention for its phenomenal success in its literacy and adult education programs, in which 40,000 people learned to read. Nonetheless, Reagan funded the partial destruction of a hydroelectric dam. The Nicaraguan government was held in the midst of repression so fierce it seemed like a hallucination, said Thomas Borge, a Sandinista minister of Interior. Indeed, war is the greatest of all evils, and the horror of all horrors. In the end, 50,000 people lay dead, 100,000 more were wounded, the cities and factories bombed by Somoza's National Guard, an economy was in ruins and faced an enormous debt. Is it possible to recover from so great a blow? In another mean-spirited move, Reagan tripled its military aid to Nicaragua's hostile neighbor, Honduras, and asked its army to harass Nicaragua. To make sure the country didn't survive, in 1985, Reagan impeded Nicaragua's access to loans from the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank.
We are extremely poor people, but please will he leave us in peace. If he'd leave us alone, this revolution could have done wonders, because even though so many things haven't been done, a lot has already been achieved.
Other countries were terrorized as well.
In the 12 years after I left office, the United States used its military force in action 32 times.
President Ronald Reagan has not been afraid to call on the name of the Lord and to invoke his blessings upon us.